This is the last day of the October 88 7-day retreat. We will not take up questions this morning, but read from the writings of Wang Po and Krishnamurti, as we've done many times in the past. In the past, a few people have asked me whether these readings are done to bring in some authority, whether these two authors are my ultimate authority, someone asked. They're not. We read from these books because the words are clear, beautiful, simple, and to the point. All the materials are copyrighted, so this tape today will not be for sale. The first book is called The Zen Teaching of Wang Po, translated by John Blofeld. The dialogues and talks have been collected and written down by Wang Po's disciple, who was a scholar and the governor of the province where Wang Po was teaching in the, I believe, 8th and 9th century in China. The other two books are Krishnamurti's notebook and Krishnamurti to himself. The notebook was written in 3/4 of a year, a diary Krishnamurti kept for less than a year. Things were written in different places where he was staying. Italy and India will be our selections in 1961. And the last book, 2 selections we'll read, were the last autobiographical, not necessarily autobiographical, commentaries that he was speaking into a tape recorder in 1983. The word Buddha in Wang Po's teachings refers not only to the historical personage of Gautama Buddha, but it is also a Sanskrit word for the enlightened mind. In the Zen tradition, to become a Buddha means to become enlightened. The word Dharma is a Sanskrit word referring both to the teachings of the Buddha, to phenomena, and also to universal truth. Sometimes we've used the English words. Also in here, words, sentences, and paragraphs have been omitted. It's not a consecutive reading of Wang Po's talks and dialogues. The Master said to me, all the Buddhas and all sentient beings are nothing but the one mind, beside which nothing exists. This mind, which is without beginning, is unborn and indestructible. It is not green nor yellow and has neither form nor appearance. It does not belong to the categories of things which exist or do not exist, nor can it be thought of in terms of young or old. It is neither long nor short, big nor small, for it transcends all limits, measures, names, traces, and comparisons. It is that which you see before you. Begin to reason about it, and you at once fall into error. It is like the boundless void which cannot be fathomed or measured. The one mind alone is the Buddha, and there is no distinction between the Buddha and sentient beings, but that sentient beings are attached to forms and seek externally for Buddhahood. By their very seeking, they lose it, for that is using mind to grasp mind. Even though they would do their utmost for a full eon, they will not be able to attain it. They do not know that if they put a stop to conceptual thought and forget their anxiety, it will appear before them. For this mind is the Buddha, and Buddha is all living beings. It is not less for being manifested in ordinary beings, nor is it greater for being manifested in the Buddhas. This dialogue we've read many times. I can never omit it from the reading, because it is 1,000 years old, and yet as though it was taking place today. Questioner, what is the way and how must it be followed? Wangpo, what sort of thing do you suppose the way to be that you should wish to follow it? Questioner, what instructions have the masters everywhere given for meditation practice and the study of the truth? Wangpo, words used to attract the dull of wit are not to be relied on. Questioner, if those teachings were meant for the dull-witted, I have yet to hear what truth has been taught to those of really high capacity. Wangpo, if they are really people of high capacity, where could they find people to follow? If they seek from within themselves, they will find nothing tangible. How much less can they find a teaching worthy of their attention elsewhere? Do not look to what is called the teaching by preachers, for what sort of preaching could that be? Or truth could that be? Questioner, if that is so, should we not seek for anything at all? Wangpo, by conceding this, you would save yourself a lot of mental effort. Questioner, but in this way, everything would be eliminated. There cannot just be nothing. Wangpo, who called it nothing? Who was this fellow? But you wanted to seek for something. Questioner, since there is no need to seek, why do you also say that not everything is eliminated? Wangpo, not to seek is to rest tranquil. Who told you to eliminate anything? Look at the void in front of your eyes. How can you produce it or eliminate it? The void not being vacuum, but the grass, the meadows, the pearls of water on the leaves, the color of trees, the sky, the meadow shimmering between the trees without naming it anything, without making a thing out of it, without knowing it. Questioner, do you mean that we should not form concepts as human beings normally do? Wangpo, I have not prevented you, But concepts are related to the senses, and when feeling takes place and concepts are formed, wisdom is shut out. Questioner, then should we avoid any feeling in relation to the truth? Wangpo, where no feeling arises, who can say that you are right? Questioner, why do you speak as though I was mistaken in all the questions I've asked your reverence? Wangpo, you're a man who doesn't understand what is said to him. What is all this about being mistaken? Questioner, up to now you have refuted everything which has been said. You've done nothing to point out the truth to us. Wangpo, in truth there is no confusion, but you produce confusion by such questions. What sort of truth can you go seeking for? Questioner, since the confusion arises from my questions, what will your reverence's answer be? Wangpo, observe things as they are and don't pay attention to other people. There are some people just like mad dogs barking at everything that moves, even barking when the wind stirs among the grass and leaves. From all you have said, says the questioner, mind is the Buddha, or the truth. But it's not clear as to what sort of mind is meant by this mind which is the Buddha. Wangpo, how many minds have you got? Questioner, but is the Buddha the ordinary mind or the enlightened mind? Wangpo, where on earth do you keep your ordinary and your enlightened mind? Questioner, in the teaching of the three vehicles, it is stated that there are both. Why does your reverence deny it? Wangpo, in the teaching of the three vehicles, it is clearly explained that the ordinary and enlightened minds are illusions. You don't understand. All this clinging to the idea of things existing is to mistake vacuity for the truth. How can such conceptions not be illusory? Being illusory, they hide mind from you. If you would only rid yourselves of the concepts of ordinary and enlightened, you would find that there is no other Buddha than the Buddha in your own mind. You people go on misunderstanding, you hold on to concepts such as ordinary and enlightened, directing your thoughts outwards where they gallop about like horses. All this amounts to beclouding your own minds. Questioner, upon what doctrine does your reverence base these words? Wangpo, why seek a doctrine? As soon as you have a doctrine, you fall into dualistic thought. Questioner, just now you said that the beginningless past and the present are the same. What do you mean by that? Wangpo, it is just because of your seeking that you make a difference between them. Here I am today, tomorrow, or in the future, I'll have enlightenment. That's creating time. It is just because of your seeking that you make a difference between them. If you were to stop seeking, how could there be any difference between them? Beginningless past and the present. When no thought arises, where is the past? Where is the present? Questioner, if they're not different, why did you employ separate terms for them? Wangpo, if you hadn't mentioned ordinary and enlightened, who would have bothered to say such things? Just as those categories have no real existence, so mind is not really mind. And as both mind and those categories are really illusions, wherever can you hope to find anything? Questioner. Illusion can hide from us our own mind, but up to now you have not taught us how to get rid of illusion. Wang Po, the arising and the elimination of illusion are both illusory. Illusion is not something rooted in reality. It exists because of your dualistic thinking. If you will only cease to indulge in opposed concepts such as ordinary and enlightened, illusion will cease of itself. And then if you still want to destroy it wherever it may be, you will find that there is not a hair's breadth left of anything on which to lay hold. This is the meaning of, I will let go with both hands, for then I shall certainly discover the Buddha in my mind. Once I put this question to the Master, how many of the 400 or 500 persons gathered here on this mountain have fully understood your Reverence's teaching? The Master answered, their number cannot be known. Why? Because this way is through mind awakening. How can it be conveyed in words? Speech only produces some effect when it falls on the uninstructed ears of children. When we talk of the knowledge I may gain, the learning I may achieve, my intuitive understanding, my deliverance from rebirth, and my moral way of living, our successes make these concepts seem pleasant to us, but our failures make them appear deplorable. What is the use of all that? I advise you to remain uniformly quiescent and above all activity. It means mental activity. Thinking about thoughts. Do not deceive yourselves with conceptual thinking, and do not look anywhere for the truth. For all that is needed is to refrain from allowing concepts to arise. It is obvious that mental concepts and external perceptions are equally misleading, and that the way of the Buddhas is as dangerous to you as the way of demons. So, full understanding can come to you only through an inexpressible mystery. The approach to it is called the gateway of the stillness beyond all activity. If you wish to understand, know that a sudden comprehension comes when the mind is purged of all the clutter of conceptual and discriminatory thought activity. Those who seek the truth by means of intellect and learning only get further and further away from it. Not till your thoughts cease all their branching here and there, not till you abandon all thoughts of seeking for something, will you be on the right road. Questioner says, at this very moment, all sort of erroneous thoughts are constantly flowing through our minds. How can you speak of our having none? Wang Po, error has no substance. It is entirely the product of your own thinking. If you see that mind is fundamentally without error, whenever thoughts arise, you will be fully convinced that they are responsible for errors. If you could prevent all conceptual movements of thought and still your thinking processes, naturally there would be no error left in you. Therefore it is said, when thoughts arise, then do all things arise. When thoughts vanish, then do all things vanish. Later on, though others may talk of the way of the Buddhas as something to be reached by various pious practices and by scripture study, you must have nothing to do with such ideas. A perception, sudden as blinking, that subject and object are one, will lead to a deeply mysterious, wordless understanding. And by this understanding, you will awake to the truth. When you happen upon someone who has no understanding, you must claim to know nothing. He may be delighted by his discovery of some way to enlightenment, yet if you allow yourselves to be persuaded by him, you will experience no delight at all, but suffer both sorrow and disappointment. Even if you do obtain from him some trifling method, it will only be a thought-constructed thing having nothing to do with Zen. Truth is something never lost to you even in moments of delusion, nor is it gained at the moment of enlightenment. It depends on nothing and is attached to nothing. It is all-pervading, spotless beauty. It is the self-existent and uncreated absolute. Ah, it is a jewel beyond all price. But how can we prevent ourselves from falling into the error of making distinctions between this and that? Huang Po, by realizing that though you eat the whole day through, no single grain has passed your lips, and that a day's journey has not taken you a single step forward. Also by uniformly abstaining from such notions as self and other, do not permit the events of your daily lives to bind you, but never withdraw yourselves from them. Avoid the error of thinking in terms of past, present, and future. The past has gone, the present is a fleeting moment, and the future has not yet come. When you practice meditation, sit in the proper position, stay perfectly tranquil, and do not permit the least movement of your minds to disturb you. This alone is what is called liberation. Ah, be diligent, be diligent. A deep-throated owl, this is from Krishnamurti's notebook. A deep-throated owl was hooting in the hills. Its deep voice penetrated the room and quickened hearing. Except for these hoots, everything was still. There was not even the croak of a frog or the rustle of some passing animal. The silence intensified between the hoots, which came from the southern hills. They filled the valley and the hills, and the air throbbed with a call. It wasn't answered for a very long time, and when it came, it was way down the valley to the west. Between them, they held the silence and the beauty of the night. Dawn would come presently, but now it was dark. You could see the outlines of the hills and that huge banyan tree. The Pleiades and Orion were setting in a clear, cloudless sky. The air was fresh by a short shower of rain. It had a perfume that comes of old trees, rain, flowers, and the very ancient hills. It was really a marvelous morning. What was outside was taking place inside, and meditation is really a movement of both, undivided. In many systems of meditation, the many systems of meditation merely trap the mind in a pattern offering marvelous escapes and sensations. It is only the immature that play with them, getting a great deal of satisfaction from them. Without self-knowing, all meditation leads to delusion, into varying forms of self-deception, factual and fancied. It was a movement of intense energy, that energy which conflict will never know. Conflict perverts and dissipates energy, as ideals and conformity do. Thought was gone, and with it feeling, but the brain was alive and fully sensitive. Love with motive ceases to be love. There is love without motive. The body was completely motionless and the brain utterly still, and both were actually aware of everything, but there was neither thought nor motion. It was not a form of hypnosis, an induced state, because there was nothing to be gained by it, no visions, sensations, all that silly business. It was a fact, and a fact has no pleasure or pain. Dawn was coming, and with it came the otherness, which is essentially part of meditation. A dog barked, and the day had begun. High up in the mountains, among the barren rocks, with not a tree or bush, was a little stream coming out of massive, unapproachable rock. It was hardly a stream, it was a trickle. As it came down, it made a waterfall, just a murmur, and it came down to the valley, and it was already shouting of its strength, the long way it would go through towns, valleys, woods, and open spaces. It was going to be an irresistible river, sweeping over its banks, purifying itself as it went along, crashing over rocks, flowing into far places, endlessly flowing to the sea. It wasn't getting to the sea that mattered, but being a river. So wide, so deep, rich and splendid. It would enter the sea and disappear into the vast, bottomless waters. But the sea was far away, many 1,000 miles. But from now until then it was life, beauty, and ceaseless merriment. None could stop that, not even the factories and dams. It was really a marvelous river, wide, deep, with so many cities on its banks, so carelessly free and never abandoning itself. All life was there upon its banks, green fields, forests, solitary houses, death, love, and destruction. There were long, wide bridges over it, graceful and well used. Other streams and rivers joined it, but she was the mother of all rivers, the little ones and the big ones. She was always full, ever purifying herself, and of an evening it was a blessing to watch her, with deepening color in the clouds and her waters golden. But the little trickle, so far away, amongst those gigantic rocks which seemed so concentrated in producing it, was the beginning of life, and its ending was beyond its banks, and the seas. Meditation was like that river, only it had no beginning and no ending. It began, and its ending was its beginning. There was no cause, and its movement was its renewal. It was always new. It never gathered to become old. It never got sullied, for it had no roots in time. It is good to meditate, not forcing it, not making any effort, beginning with a trickle and going beyond time and space, where thought and feeling cannot enter, where experience is not. The sun comes out of the trees and sets over the town, and between the trees and the town is all life, is all time. The river passes between them, deep, alive, and tranquil. Many small boats go up and down it, some with large square sails which carry wood, sand, cut stone, and sometimes men and women going back to their villages. But mostly there are small fishing boats with lean, dark men. They appear to be very happy, voluble people, calling and shouting to each other, though they are all clad in rags, with not much to eat, and inevitably with many children. They cannot read and write. They have no outside entertainment, no cinemas, and so forth. But they amuse themselves singing in chorus, devotional songs, or telling religious stories. They are all very poor, and life is very hard. Disease and death are always there, like the earth and the river. And that evening there were more swallows than ever, flying low, almost touching the water, and the water was the color of dying fire. Everything was so alive, so intense. 4 or 5 fat puppies were playing around their thin, hungry mother. Crows, many groups of them, were flying back to the other bank. Parrots were flying back to their trees in their flashing, screeching manner. The train was crossing the bridge, and the noise of it came far down the river, and a woman was washing herself in the cold river. Everything was struggling to live, a battle for its very life, and there's always death, to struggle every moment of life and then to die. But between the rising of the sun and its setting behind the walls of the city, time consumed all life. Time past and present ate man's heart away. He existed in time and so knew sorrow. But the village men walking behind along a narrow path beside the river, strung out one by one, somehow were part of the man walking in front. There were 8 of them, and the old man directly behind was coughing and spitting all the time, and the others were more or less walking silently. The man that was in front was aware of them, their silence, their coughs, their weariness after a long day. They were not agitated but quiet, and, if anything, cheerful. He was aware of them as he was aware of the glowing river, of the gentle fire of the sky, and the birds coming back to their home. There was no center from which he was seeing, feeling, observing. All these imply the word, thought. There was no thought, but only these things. They were all walking fast, and time had ceased to be. Those villagers were going back home to their hovels, and the man was going with them. They were part of him. Not that he was aware of them as being apart. They were flowing with the river, flying with the birds, and were as open and wide as the sky. It was a fact and not imagination. Imagination is a shoddy thing, and fact is a burning reality. All those 9 were walking endlessly, going nowhere and coming from nowhere. It was an endless procession of life. Time and all identity had ceased strangely. When the man in front turned to walk back, all the villagers, especially the old man who was so close just behind him, greeted as though they were age-old friends. It was getting dark, the swallows had gone. There were lights on the long bridge, and the trees were withdrawing into themselves. Far away, a temple bell was ringing. This is the last entry in this 1961 journal. The trees were bare, every leaf had fallen off, even the thin, delicate stems were breaking off. The cold had been too much for them. There were other trees which kept their leaves, but they were not too green. Some of them were turning brown. It was an exceptionally cold winter. There was heavy snow all along the lower ranges of the Himalayas, several feet thick, and in the plains a few hundred miles away it was quite cold. There was heavy frost on the ground, and flowers were not blooming. The lawns were burnt. There were a few roses whose color filled the little garden, and the yellow pansies. But on the roads and public places you saw the poor, wrapped up in torn, filthy rags, bare-legged, their heads covered up, their dark faces hardly showing. The women had every kind of colored cloth on them, dirty, with silver bangles or some ornament around their ankles and around their wrists. They walked freely, easily, and with a certain grace. They held themselves very well. Most of them were laborers, but in the evening as they went back to their homes, huts really, they would be laughing, teasing each other, and the young would be shouting and laughing far ahead of the older people. It was the end of the day, and they had been laboring heavily all day. They would wear themselves out very quickly, and they had built houses and offices where they would never live or ever work. All the important people went by there in their cars, and these poor people never even bothered to look who went by. The sun was setting behind some ornate building in a mist that had been hanging about all day. It had no color, no warmth, and there wasn't a flutter among the flags of different countries. These flags too were weary. They were just colored rags, but what importance they had assumed. A few crows were drinking out of a puddle, and other crows were coming in to have their share. The sky was pale and ready for the night. Every thought, every feeling was gone, and the brain was utterly still. It was past midnight, and there was no noise. It was cold, and the moonlight was coming in through one of the windows. It made a pattern on the wall. The brain was very awake, watching without reacting, without experiencing. There was not a movement within itself, but it was not insensitive or drugged by memory. And of a sudden, that unknowable immensity was there, not only in the room and beyond, but also deep in the innermost recesses which was once the mind. Thought has a border, produced by every kind of reaction, and every motive shapes it as with every feeling. Every experiencing is from the past, and every recognition is from the known. But that immensity left no mark. It was there, clear, strong, impenetrable and unapproachable, whose intensity was fire that left no ash. With it was bliss, and that too left no memory, for there was no experiencing it. It simply was there, to come and go, without pursuit and recall. The past and the unknown do not meet at any point. They cannot be brought together by any act whatsoever. There is no bridge to cross over, nor a path that leads to it. The two have never met and will never meet. The past has to cease for the unknowable, for that immensity to be. And we'll read just the first and the last selection of Krishnamurti to himself, his last journal, which was spoken, it was not written. Both of them were spoken in Ojai, California. There is a tree by the river, and we have been watching it day after day for several weeks, when the sun is about to rise. As the sun rises slowly over the horizon, over the trees, this particular tree becomes all of a sudden golden. All the leaves are bright with life, and as you watch it, as the hours pass by, that tree whose name does not matter, what matters is that beautiful tree. An extraordinary quality seems to spread all over the land, over the river. And as the sun rises a little higher, the leaves begin to flutter, to dance. And each hour seems to give to that tree a different quality. Before the sun rises, it has a somber feeling, quiet, far away, full of dignity. And as the day begins, the leaves with the light on them dance and give it that peculiar feeling that one has of great beauty. By midday, its shadow has deepened, and you can sit there protected from the sun, never feeling lonely, with the tree as your companion. As you sit there, there is a relationship of deep, abiding security and a freedom that only trees can know. Towards the evening, when the western skies are lit up by the setting sun, the tree gradually becomes somber, dark, closing in on itself. The sky has become red, yellow, green, but the tree remains quiet, hidden, and is resting for the night. If you establish a relationship with it, then you have a relationship with mankind. You're responsible then for that tree and for the trees of the world. But if you have no relationship with the living things on this earth, you may lose whatever relationship you have with humanity, with human beings. We rarely look deeply into the quality of a tree. We never really touch it, feel its solidity, its rough bark, and hear the sound that is part of the tree. Not the sound of wind through the leaves, not the breeze of a morning that flutters the leaves, but its own sound, the sound of the trunk and the silent sounds of the roots. You must be extraordinarily sensitive to hear the sound. The sound is not the noise of the world, not the noise of the chattering of the mind, not the vulgarity of human quarrels and human warfare, but sound is part of the universe. It is odd that we have so little relationship with nature, with the insects and the leaping frog and the owl that hoots among the hills calling for its mate. We never seem to have a feeling for all living things on the earth. If we could establish a deep, abiding relationship with nature, we would never kill an animal for our appetite. We would never harm, vivisect a monkey, a dog, a guinea pig for our benefit. We would find other ways to heal our wounds, heal our bodies. But the healing of the mind is something totally different. That healing gradually takes place if you are with nature, with that orange on the tree and the blade of grass that pushes through the cement and the hills covered, hidden by the clouds. Walking down the straight road on a lovely morning, it was spring and the sky was extraordinarily blue. There wasn't a cloud in it and the sun was just warm, not too hot. It felt nice. And the leaves were shining and a sparkle was in the air. It was really a most extraordinarily beautiful morning. The high mountains were there, impenetrable, and the hills below were green and lovely. And as you walked along quietly, without much thought, you saw a dead leaf, yellow and bright red, a leaf from the autumn. How beautiful that leaf was, so simple in its death, so lively, full of the beauty and vitality of the whole tree in the summer. Strange that it had not withered. Looking at it more closely, one saw all the veins and the stem and the shape of that leaf. That leaf was all the tree. Why do human beings die so miserably, so unhappily, with the disease, old age, senility, the body shrunk? Why can't they die naturally and as beautifully as this leaf? In spite of all the doctors, medicines, and hospitals, operations, and all the agony of life, and the pleasures too, we don't seem to be able to die with dignity, simplicity, and with a smile. Once, walking along a lane, one heard behind one a chant, melodious, rhythmic, with the ancient strength of Sanskrit. One stopped and looked around. An eldest son, naked to his waist, was carrying a terracotta pot with a fire burning in it. He was holding it in another vessel, and behind him were two men carrying his dead father, covered with a white cloth, and they were all chanting. One knew what that chant was. One almost joined in. They went past, and one followed them. They were going down the road, chanting, and the eldest son was in tears. They carried the father to the beach, where they had already collected a great pile of wood, and they laid the body on top of that heap of wood and set it on fire. It was all so natural, so extraordinarily simple. There were no flowers, there was no hearse, there were no black carriages with black horses. It was all very quiet and utterly dignified. And one looked at that dead leaf and the 1,000 leaves of the tree. The winter brought that leaf from its mother on to that path, and it would presently die out completely and wither, be gone, carried away by the winds and lost. As you teach children mathematics, writing, reading, and all the business of acquiring knowledge. They should also be taught the great dignity of death, not as a morbid, unhappy thing that one has to face eventually, but as something of daily life, the daily life of looking at the blue sky and the grasshopper on a leaf. It is part of learning as you grow teeth and have all the discomfort of childish illnesses. Children have extraordinary curiosity. If you see the nature of death, you don't explain that everything dies, dust to dust, and so on, but without any fear you explain it to them gently and make them feel that the living and the dying are one, not at the end of one's life after 50, 60, or 90 years, but that death is like that leaf. Look at the old men and women, how lost, how unhappy, and how ugly they look. Is it because they have not really understood either living or dying? They have used life, they waste away their life with incessant conflict, which only exercises and gives strength to the self, the me, the ego. We spend our days in such varieties of conflict and unhappiness, with some joy and pleasure, drinking, smoking, late nights, and work, work, work. And at the end of one's life, one faces that thing called death and is frightened of it. One thinks it can always be understood, felt deeply. The child with his curiosity can be helped to understand that death is not merely the wasting of the body through disease, old age, and some unexpected accident, but that the ending of every day is also the ending of oneself every day. There is no resurrection that is superstition, a dogmatic belief. Everything on earth, on this beautiful earth, lives, dies, comes into being, and withers away. To grasp this whole movement of life requires intelligence, not the intelligence of thought or books or knowledge, but the intelligence of love and compassion with its sensitivity. One is very certain that if the educator understands the significance of death and the dignity of it, the extraordinary simplicity of dying, understands it not intellectually but deeply, then he may be able to convey to the student, to the child, that dying, the ending, is not to be avoided, is not something to be frightened of, for it is part of one's whole life, so that as the student, the child, grows up, he will never be frightened of the ending. If all the human beings who have lived before us, past generations upon generations, still lived on this earth, how terrible it would be. The beginning is not the ending. And one would like to help. No, that's the wrong word. One would like in education to bring death into some kind of reality, actuality. Not of someone else dying, but of each one of us, however old or young, having inevitably to face that thing. It is not a sad affair of tears, of loneliness, of separation. We kill so easily, not only the animals for one's food, but the vast unnecessary killing for amusement called sport, killing a deer because that is the season. Killing a deer is like killing your neighbor. You kill animals because you have lost touch with nature, with all the living things on this earth. You kill in wars for so many romantic, nationalistic, political ideologies. In the name of God, you have killed people. Violence and killing go together. As one looked at that dead leaf with all its beauty and color, maybe one would very deeply comprehend, be aware of what one's own death must be, not at the very end, but at the very beginning. Death isn't some horrific thing, something to be avoided, something to be postponed, but rather something to be with day in and day out. Out of that comes an extraordinary sense of immensity. We will end here for today.